I'm Alfonso Winker.
And I'm Trina Olson. And together, we're the co-founders of Team Dynamics.
And this is Behave. And we're back.
It's so good to be back.
It's so good to be back. And I've always wanted to say that because one of my favorite media companies, one of my favorite podcast companies, Crooked Media, a lot of their hosts say, and we're back all the time. So I've been holding on to that one for a while.
And it could be from anywhere, right? Like we're back from a horseback ride. We're back from swimming. We're back from watching a fun program.
Right. Maybe you're back to listening to us.
Oh, that's great.
So guess what today is?
It's so many things. What do you think today is?
Today is Power Day on Behave.
Yes. I love thinking about and talking about power in large part because I don't think any of us are meaning the same thing when we say it. So if we don't talk it through, I'm not even going to know what we're talking about. Power over, power under, power next to, empowered, disempowered. There's a lot there.
Absolutely. And I think like with so many of the concepts that we talk about when we have these conversations, folks are really lobbing the word at each other, around each other in order to make a case, in order to stamp their foot, in order to illustrate what exactly it is they're feeling. And so I'm excited to unpack it. And I think there's a really important caveat to put on this conversation.
Okay.
This isn't the only conversation we'll ever have on Behave about power.
Right.
This is a snippet, a snapshot. We do whole days with people on power and come at it from lots of different angles. So I think how we're going to organize our thinking today is we want to talk conceptually about power for a little bit. And then we want to get into some of the so what now at the real life experiences we have in wielding and exercising and paying attention to and analyzing power in our lives.
Yeah, I think there's something around, we've been hearing a lot of people talk about, and I feel like it's been in the news too, just conversations about power dynamics. Like there's a power dynamic in the room I don't like, or I feel this power dynamic with my boss, or I feel this power dynamic with our funder. And it's like, wow, that could be of sort of any stripe or type. So it's interesting because I think, again, we're back to that moment of people aren't being specific enough to be helpful enough to actually craft a strategy. Because do we need more power? Do we need the power to be in somebody else's hands? Are we missing our ability to be maximally powerful because we're missing a perspective, right? So it's like getting more and more specific can get us out of this place of this really false dichotomy of I am either powerful or powerless. In my lived experience, in my body as a 38-year-old white queer woman, I'm feeling mostly both at the same time. I feel very powerful and powerless. And it's like, what am I going to do about that?
Okay, I love that you said that because you're pointing to something that I think we're often trying to talk about in rooms with folks and in these conversations on Behave, that lots of different things get to be true at the same time. And that is also a reality of paying attention to power. And so you were just naming like folks are noticing times when they feel like power is on the other side of the room or other side of the table or in a different location than where they are or in their own sense of agency. And I think when we're just sort of stamping our foot and saying there is a power dynamic or they have power and I don't, or we don't have the power that they have, I think it cheapens a nuanced conversation and it takes away some of the agency that we actually have in remembering that we aren't ever powerless. It's a fallacy that I am ever powerless. And there are forces at play that might be trying to take away my power. So I might feel like you have power and I don't because you're a white person and I'm a person of color.
Yeah.
But I need to pay attention to and remember and claim all the power that I have.
Right. I think it sometimes leads into a cool conversation about allyship and solidarity in all of its stripes. Because I think if I am to remember my whole embodied self, which includes the experience I've had, the perspective I've had, the way I get treated because of the body people perceive me to be in, it's like I can actually remember that I have all of these superpowers, or I think about it like one of those tools where you open it up and it's like a Swiss Army knife and a bottle opener plus a screwdriver. And so when I remember the power I have as a white person, when I feel disempowered as a woman, and I think about the creativity I have through my powerful experiences being queer, right? It's remembering that none of those feelings of powerfulness or powerlessness are static.
It's situational, right?
Totally.
So all the possibility lives in you. And I think in the workplace, we're not practiced at holding that and remembering that and paying attention to our own experiences of lack of power or having of power. And I think it just feels most present when we feel like someone's doing something that is harmful, hurtful, uncomfortable, far away from the decision we would have made. And so we're quick to, and we're more aware of instances where we feel like we don't have power. And I think we forget to be in regular analysis of our own locations of power and locations of power folks around us, rather than thinking of power as a have not.
Right. I almost was visualizing when you were talking, it's like when people have used a talking stick of some sort to say when somebody's holding this, they get to talk when you're not. And this idea that power can get passed around cleanly like that, and that only one person has it at a time, does us a disservice, right? And I think it's why we at Team Dynamics fixate on teams, because if you have this cool, present, conscious, mixed teams, you actually have all sorts of kinds of power present. So how can you lean on each other? How can you ask for help from each other? How can you ask for advocacy? And also, how can you practice really showing up in the places you have power, whether or not you feel like you earned it and whether or not you feel like you deserve it?
And I think in that call that you're making, there's a requirement to be honest about the presence of power and about the presence of power dynamics. So we'll hear people say a lot like, well, I know I'm a man, or I know I'm a white person, but I just want you to think of me as your colleague right now. Or let's pretend for a moment like I'm not the boss and let's just have the real conversation. I think the most real conversations come when we're actually speaking right into the presence and reality of that power, rather than saying let's pretend like it's somewhere else for the moment.
Right. Like today, when I walked in to record this, I hadn't seen Levi in a little while. And I said, because it occurred to me when I saw him and I got excited, I said, oh, can I have a hug? And then I said, but you don't have to, because I know that you know that I'm your boss, right? And I named it, and we're close, so it's funny between us. And I name it because I really do want to make sure he's crystal clear that he could always say no.
Absolutely. So let's take a quick break and then talk about some of our lived experiences of power.
Let's do it. Welcome back. You know, as we were thinking about having this conversation today, there's actually a story that I'm not sure if you know or not, and maybe have told it to you, but it just sort of arose in me as I think about sort of really key eye-opening moments for me in my life around how people creatively and consciously have wielded power near me. So I have lived in Washington, D.C. twice, and I was in an apartment building that was on top of a hill, and it was next to a park. And it's like a multi-block park, and it was really pretty. And I would often get off of the bus a stop before so that I could walk through the park. So as you know, as we get to winter, it gets dark really, really, really early. So by the time I was getting back from work, it was just pitch black, right? And my boss at the time, Dan, lived near-ish me, like adjacent neighborhoods. And I remember once talking about how much I loved walking through the park and how it was like a bummer when it was, you know, becoming winter, because I have been conditioned as a female-bodied and feminine-presenting person to be nervous in sort of dark, open places where nobody could really hear me if something happened, right? And I remember I was just sort of talking about it kind of out of nowhere, and my boss, who is a much taller than me white man, just said to me, hey, Trina, if you ever want to walk in the park, I'm happy to walk 15 feet behind you. And I said, what? And it wasn't like, let's go on a walk together. It was, I want you to get to do that because, by the way, I get to do that whenever I want to. I'm not nervous at all. So it's interesting. I didn't take him up on it, but I've actually been thinking about it now because it's summer and it's been really late, but I actually really love walking around the lake by my house as the sun sets. But I get nervous that it'll be pitch black by the time I get to my car. So I've been thinking about talking to y'all and saying, hey, great. I don't know how you feel walking in the dark, but I really like it, but I don't like it if I'm by myself. So that was one of the first moments when it occurred to me I was likely not being creative enough about how I offer to just be with people I care about, given the kinds of power I have. So I think about it when I'm an ally with a trans or gender nonconforming person in a public bathroom and how I'll wait by the sink until somebody comes out of the stall so that they will not get harassed in my presence, or if they do, I'm going to do something about it. Or Alfonso, when you and I go through airport security together, and we talk about, and we talk about what it's like for you to be a person of color who's a tall, broad-shouldered man with a beard and what TSA thinks about that. And so I think that moment when Dan was like, this isn't about me protecting you, this isn't about power over, it's just saying, I hear you, that your fear feels real to you and you want this thing, I think I could help.
Okay, so what's so powerful, if I may, about that story is it conveniently, and we didn't, you've told me that story actually before, and I know Dan, and I think that's an incredible working relationship to have, is it maps to a fairly short and simple process that individuals and teams, I think, can use to really consider and pay closer attention to power. And so there's 3 steps, and I want to talk about the 3 steps and try to map them to your story with Dan. So the first step is to define and map. So really define what power is present and sort of set everything next to each other on a map to say, what do I know about my power, your power, and the power that's present in this situation? The second is to come up with the protocol or the how we are going to actively navigate through, not around, the truth of the presence of those power dynamics. And then the third is to practice and then ask ourselves what's happening and how is it working. So when I think about your story, and I think about the step 1 of define and map, you and Dan both talked about your identities as being men and women, your identities as white people, and then the associated feelings or emotions.
Yeah.
So you defined the dynamic was that women are more likely to experience sexual violence than men are.
Sure.
So we know that to be true.
Full stop.
You have a particular feeling about that, and you have a desire to move through a particular space, right? So
and a lived experience.
Right. You know enough, and he believes both your lived experience and the data, right? So we've defined what is going on, and we've mapped where we are in that context.
Right.
So then next we talk about a protocol. How are we going to navigate that? Not just say oh, gee, that's unfortunate or hard, or I hope you're okay out there. Shoot me a text when you get home. And I bet it was terrifying to move through the park alone.
Yeah.
So there was an offer and an ask.
Yeah.
Right? You could think about, given what we know about each other and the context, how might we try to show up together? And then the third step is you checked in. So let's try it out. Let's see how it feels. It's an offer that is on the table. It's something we might try if we need to. We don't have to do it every time or always or forever. But now that we've mapped it, we know a way of navigating through it. And then how is it feeling? So I think that's a way that teams and managers and groups of people can stop just getting overwhelmed by their experience of the presence of power, but to actually have an honest conversation with each other. Define and map what is present. Talk about, given this actual reality, how might we like to behave? And then let's practice it and check in about it.
Thanks for putting a button on that.
Bing.
I can't wait.
That's not a button, that's a bell.
I liked it. I liked it still. I know we're going to talk about power a ton more because it's something we are talking about, right? Power, interpersonal, institutional, systemic, is really relevant to conversations about a world we want to live in when we think about equity and race and gender and more. You're listening to Behave, and we'll be right back. Let's share for a second what we've been reading or what we've been listening to that has been giving us joy, ideas, and thoughts about sort of our powerfulness.
So you reminded me just before this episode of a thing that I've been doing a lot and constantly talking about.
Yeah.
And so my roommate, Jeffrey, and I have been obsessed with Bon Appetit's Test Kitchen YouTube videos.
Yeah, you absolutely have.
They're excellent. They're all less than 30 minutes. And they absolutely make you feel like you can create this like delicious gourmet dish. And they've inspired us to practice the dishes and then have people come over and try them. And
Yeah,
so what
your
like,
Instagram has been on fire lately.
oh, you would think that I am like a food grammer. I am not. I'm like a sloppy Instagrammer. But it's real. It's just like a crispy smashed potato, a charred broccoli. It's all beautiful.
Yeah.
But what I love two things about it. As teachers, I love to watch other teachers.
Yes, you do.
And I love when folks are like, no, you the person who I assume can and will be doing this, and it is possible for you to do this. So like, let me show you how to properly microplane a serrano pepper. And I'm like,
I don't know how to do that.
Let's. So I think it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and it's inspired me to think about how to talk to folks in these conversations on Behave about how it's absolutely possible to do something that feels really far away. I had never considered parboiling and then broiling a potato before I dressed it. And now it's all I ever think about.
I like that you're saying, right, this thing might on the surface level look so intimidating and so far beyond your current capacity. If we reverse engineer, if we back it up, if we do it piece by piece and make everything that was invisible visible, meaning like define parboil before you do it. Right. Otherwise, you're like reading directions. You're like, I don't know what that means. But if you go piece by piece, get specific enough, you too could be having a delicious summer experience.
Okay, total aside.
Okay.
Not knowing what parboil means reminds me of a scene in Schitt's Creek when David and Moira are trying to make, as they say, enchiladas. And it says fold in the cheese, and neither of them know what that means. And they don't know how to they don't know how to fold. I know how to fold.
Did they like put a Kraft single in half?
They were trying to. What's inspiring you right now, Trina?
So I ordered and began reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. And I had been turned on to this book because I was listening and watching him being interviewed on the Chase Jarvis live show and podcast. And so it was interesting because, right, any book title that has an expletive in it, it's like, oh, is this just to be shocking?
Right.
Like, what is this about? And so I'll say the way that I'm reading it, which is why I've been sort of like ravenously taking it in and then bringing it to work and showing you pieces. I even brought it when we had dinner the other night and was like, look I know we're sitting at the bar of this restaurant. Let me read you a short passage. I think the bartender really liked it.
But he was listening.
So the way that I'm reading it is that it's really talking about prioritizing and choice making. And the thing I liked about it is it said sort of the obsession we're all in about being in control of everything is why we give so many fucks, right? And it's like, what if we were really choosing what kind of pain or discomfort we were willing to go through rather than constantly choosing the kind of spasmodic ecstasy we want to experience and just sort of constant joy. And so when I think about the fact that I've chosen to, for example, work on elections that have really long cycles or involve talking to thousands of voters and fundraising or living in community housing in basements, or I think about being entrepreneurs and being stressed out about cash flow or thinking about growing a business and that being what keeps me up at night, that feels great because I've chosen it. I've decided what I'm going to really care about, and the rest of it I can't care as much about, right? So it's this interesting conversation about control, which is something I really wrestled with as a leader because sometimes I have felt powerless or like I have just less power when I have less control. This is reminding me to focus on the parts of control that are A, in my control, and B, that actually matter to me. It's not about what other people give fucks about. It's what I've decided my purpose is. So it's been powerful. I'm not all the way through it yet. We would love for you to tell us what you want to hear us talk about. Tweet us at Team Dynamics LLC. You can email us at team@teamdynamicsmn, that's because we're based in Minnesota.com.
If you want to work with us, you can check out our website at www.teamdynamicsmn.com. And we have a fall series coming up. We're offering a 4-part training, September through December. You can register for the fall series on our website. You'll have a chance to learn from some of our expert trainers and facilitators on some of these very topics that we talk about.
Also, the food is going to be delicious.
Always a hot lunch.
Always a hot lunch here at Team Dynamics. Behave is recorded in Studio G at the Glenn Nelson Center and is produced by Levi Weinhagen.
Go with God.
Make good choices. Okay. Oh no, the light.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're in timeout.
You're already in the corner.
Okay. Nobody puts baby in the corner.
No, I'm not going to call you baby.
I'm ready. Okay.